Okay. I'll call this meeting to order at 7 p.m. of the Economic and Community Development Committee of the Common Council. And I will announce who is present with us this evening, and that's Ms. Shanahan, Mr. Livingston, and Ms. Smith are with us, and myself, John Kites. We're waiting on Ms. Young, who should be joining us shortly. Public participation. Sabrina, do we have anyone signed up to speak?
We do have one person. We have Miss Diane Loracella with her hand raised. Diane, I'm allowing you to talk now, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Sabrina. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, as well as committee members. For the record, my name is Diane Loracella, 21 Little Fox Lane. There are a lot of interesting items on tonight's agenda. I did have one question that I would love to have as part of the record, and it would be great to have a discussion inclusive of especially, well, number 2, but especially number 4, the Arts and Cultural District. And that is, what is the future fate of our main library going to be? I cannot think of a better committee that I would ask that they take a stand about the current discussion about what we are going to do with the option on putting together a true main library center. This committee, Economic and Community Development, has had, of course, a big role in the Wall Street redevelopment plans, and the library is part of that. So currently we are in a crisis because we have a month or less in order to exercise the option. And there are many, many other things being discussed about using the Yankee Doodle garage instead. And it's not just a parking issue, it is also a library expansion issue. We need additional land to expand the building of the library. It would be terrific if we had, especially for the Arts and Cultural District, a first floor modern auditorium, so we could have the same kinds of forums and arts and music that all of our surrounding towns have achieved in the last 10, 15 years of renovating their libraries, and we consistently are not doing it. So I ask this be part of the discussion tonight, because we don't have until next month to wait for you to have another meeting. Mr. Chairman, is this committee going to, in a transparent way, tell the public what the heck is going on with the main library? I thank you. I hope you will discuss this. It is of urgent importance to many Norwalkians. Thank you.
Thank you. Sabrina, anybody else signed up?
There is nobody else signed up.
Okay, thank you. We'll close public participation on to the approval of the minutes of April 6, 2023. I know, Ms. Smith, there was some, you had reached out to me in regards to these minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll go ahead and move the minutes. And yes, I was in attendance. I'm not listed as an attendee in that meeting. Also, as I'm looking at it, I noticed Mr. Meek's first name is spelled wrong, B-R-Y, not B-R-I.
Okay. I'll let the record show Mrs. Smith's changes to make note that she was here and Mr. Meek's name is spelled incorrectly. Any other corrections, deletions, omissions before I call for a vote? Okay, and thank you for moving that. And all in favor, please raise your hand to signify yes. Unanimous, great. And let the record show Councilwoman Diana Revelis has also joined us, not a part of the committee, but nice to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you too.
Now moving on to new business, and that's item A, planning and zoning, and we're going to start with the update on the waterfront study. I believe we have Mr. Kleppen. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Nice to see you again. Assuming everybody can see that before I start talking. Okay, I'll take that. Yeah, very good. So it's been a couple of months since we chatted about this. I had to kind of put it aside for a little bit while we were ramping up for the outreach with the draft zoning regulations, which is your next item on the agenda. So I figured it'd be a good time to circle back. We kind of left it that there were a few areas left under discussion. We would come back and discuss those. And then with the idea of kind of trying to fold the recommendations of the waterfront study per the specific land use areas into the final zoning regulations that, eventually go out for public vote. So figured we would start north to south. There were two areas, as I talked about. One was kind of the Upper Harbor area, and that a lot of it concerned the west side of the river. So this is kind of the transfer station down to the south, King Industries, and they have some properties going to the north. Then it transitions to the Divine Brothers property, and then eventually winds up with some more traditional commercial, and then starting to get a little bit of mixed use on the west side again as you get on Commerce Street up towards Wall Street. And then we did have some discussions as well in this area about the fate of the ONG properties, which are on the east side of the river. So this is kind of the zoom in of I'll call it the northern portion of the Upper Harbor. Again, looking at, this is the Head of the Harbor South development that was built a few years ago. This is majority of this is ONG property on the east side over here. That's kind of a semi-active site where formerly was an asphalt plant at one time. Now I think it's just more material storage, which they use in and out with. And I think they do get some barge deliveries of materials as well. On the west side of the river, this is a portion of the Divine Brothers property where they do their cement mixing, as well as they have the oil storage on this. So they kind of have a wide variety of mixed uses. Commerce Street is here, and then again, here's the railroad tracks that kind of run through their site through there. So just moving further south before we get into the kind of the meat of the discussion, the southern end of that, starts to transition from the contractor yards up to Divine. And this is all property owned by King Industries, and here's city property to the transfer station to the south. This is a kind of a mix of uses on the northern part of their property. I think it's some lay down area, as well as they have the rowing club in there. And I think there's just a few, I think I'm going to guess subleased areas for some contractors that have some small yards in there as well. So going back to the, carrying over from the industrial zone study, as well as the waterfront study, those two plans kind of said, maybe we want to think about classifying your industrial zones a little differently. So you have this, mix from heavy industrial to a lighter industrial. Then you can kind of get into like a boutique manufacturing phase that can also mix into mixed use element as well. So like those boutique manufacturers can fit in a mixed use environment, which in the boutique manufacturer could be like a craft brewer, it could be a chocolate maker, something lighter, usually something that doesn't give off fumes or odors. Whereas like the heavy industrial would be kind of categorized what King Industry does. We also lumped in contractor yards, and then some of the uses down on Meadow Street that we rezoned last fall. And then in the mix of that is kind of that what we call the I2 zone. And that's kind of like what the desired goals are for the industrial zone study, trying to bring in more of that high-tech manufacturing, or at least set the seeds for that to have the opportunity to succeed in the city. So that's kind of the purpose of that I2 zone. And you might not be able to see all these, and I'm happy to send these out at a later date. So the plan had several options built into it for different land use categories for the different areas. And a lot of the focus was on, so I'll just orientate you, hopefully you guys can see this on your screen. This is the city property transfer station here. This purple is, a lot of this is King. And so that's classified as the heavy industrial, where the properties in this lighter, I'm not sure what you would call that. I'm going to call it periwinkle for lack of better, I guess, color code. That's the lighter industrial, or what we call the I2, whereas the yellow is existing residential, And the pink can go either way, I guess. The pink can go into more of the mixed use environment that you see along the Wall Street West Ave corridor, or the pink could transition to that, like that light manufacturing, or be a mix of the I2 zone. So there's a myriad of options. So when we last talked, there was a lot of concern about the future of these properties and whether the plan should be more definitive on the rezoning now, or as I had advocated for, was this is.
Sorry,
a
Steve, can I
plan-
just stop you for a minute? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Sabrina, Darlene's trying to get in and said she can't. Can you check on that, please? And if not, send her another link.
Yep.
To her city email. Thank you.
Sure. Would you like me to wait a minute while she gets in?
And that may be a while. Please continue, Steve.
Sure. So when we had talked last, there was discussion about because the industrial zones plan, if you recall, and going back a few years now, the East Norwalk TOD plan, there was very specific zoning recommendations within those plans. The tact we took with this plan in some areas was to leave several options open. And the reason would be that there are, with this area, the waterfront properties in particular, there's a lot of competing interests and opinions on that. And in several of these areas, there are several plausible alternatives for some of these uses of land. So what we did based on our last conversation was go back and I think give you a complete palette of all the options you could do. So you could basically pick or choose whatever you felt was appropriate to include in the plan. I would not recommend having this many in the plan. I think the idea would be, you would definitely get whittled down. And I think we'll probably have a discussion on whether the plan should be more definitive as opposed to having options. There are, like I said, there are competing uses on this. I would draw a contrast to what we did with the industrial zones, particularly on the Meadow Street parcels, and leaving aside the fact that the school went in, the location, or the proposed school was going into the location it was going into. Some of those uses on, and I'm not going to try to pick on anybody, but some of those uses right along Meadow Street, I think from a neighborhood's perspective are not what they want to see in the area in terms of auto salvage and, junk vehicles and all those things. And particularly some of those operators in the past have been problematic in terms of the dust and the noise and the things that they give off, which are kind of counter what the neighborhood wanted to see. Whereas some of these uses in the area don't have that same issue. And I think there's a stark contrast in terms of the employment base for some of these businesses versus what's going on in South Norwalk. Tom, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So Steve, just what are you, I guess I'm a little confused. So what are you asking us tonight? I mean, at our last meeting, I think we were pretty clear about wanting to have less industrial along the waterfront. So, and I'm seeing all these options, some of which have more, some have less. So what do you intend to do with these options and why are you showing them to us, to be blunt?
The idea to show to you is
do we get to pick?
Well, yes and no, I guess, but I think the idea is to give you some, just to indicate that a lot of these different options are plausible. I will continue to advocate, particularly on the King property, and it's not King versus anybody else. It's just the fact that the type of business that they operate there, and I in a perfect world, all these businesses wouldn't be located right along the water, and we probably would be having a different conversation. But since they're there, and I think from an economic standpoint, they are a strong job creator and job holder for the city. So I think making them non-conforming by rezoning it away from I-1, I think would be problematic. Now, we talked about this a lot with the industrial zone study, that they can, if you make them non-conforming, they can continue to operate in perpetuity as they currently do. However, that would curtail the ability to expand. If they wanted to make their building 10,000 square feet bigger, they might need to go get a variance. And that potentially could signal to them that the city rezoning me is saying, hey, maybe I don't want to, the city doesn't want me here long-term. And I don't know if that's the best policy. A couple other factors to consider as well is, for Divine and, I guess to a lesser extent, the ONG site, they are technically truly water dependent uses. And I think are a lot of the reason for the justification that we use in order to get dredging of the upper part of the water course. And, you know, if that were to no longer be a use there, I think that has financial implications for the city. And also, you know, reverts back to the conversation about the walk bridge as well. So I think I understand this is really not a simple discussion in terms of the implications on whatever choice the city decides, but my advocating is for leaving options in the plan. I can, one of my next slide, I'll show you this.
Well, just before you go to that, because I think they're different approaches, but I think, again, I thought last meeting, we were pretty clear that we wanted to get rid of some of the heavy industrial there. So leaving options kind of goes against that. Maybe it's not all, you know, maybe we don't get rid of all heavy industrial, but to go at this saying it can be any of these things, I don't think is consistent with at least what I heard at the last meeting, and certainly not what I feel today.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say to leave all these in there. I think this graphic in particular, and I'm happy to email this out after the meeting,
Okay,
is just to say you could technically, all these are viable. I know I'm not saying all of them are preferred or would be preferred, but I think all of them you could make a rational argument as to why they're appropriate on a given site.
Okay, but not to belabor the point, but so are you going to come back to us later and say, which do we want? Or I mean, could you say
yes,
these are options? I mean, what?
Yeah, I'm not expecting you to tell me tonight, go with A, G, and I, for example. I think that just to start the conversation, I'm happy to come back next month and revisit the topic with you. And I definitely wouldn't, like I said, recommend keeping A through K in the plan. I think that's kind of, that pretty much, there's no point in doing the plan then, because you can then pretty much
Yeah,
could
but
have
it's not
done
a plan.
anything.
It's not a plan.
Right.
Right. Yeah, can I chime in real quick? I mean, this is a lot, obviously. Steve, do you have a slide that shows what the current zoning is in the area? So we can, you know, compare apples to apples?
No, unfortunately, I don't. I can tell you though that I know most of it by just practice. It's probably easier to go off of this slide though to show you and go to this view. So again, this is the transfer station King as you transition up to Divine. So this stretch through here, and I think this is still the King Industry property. I might be wrong, but I think it is. That's Industrial 1. There's also Industrial 1 across the street that kind of flanks Harbor Ave. When you move up to Divine, and this is an important point, I think, it transitions to the Central Business District water zone, which was kind of a placeholder we put in at the time, thinking we were going to do this study. So that already allows the mixed use aspect, but also has the, you know, requirement for the water dependent use. So I think it makes more sense to, you know, start that transition north of, you know, say, and I'm just kind of picking a little bit arbitrary. So my gut reaction and gut recommendation is at a point to the south, keep this Industrial 1 and then start to transition it north up to something more, you know, transitioning either to a lower intensity industrial or a mixed use environment as you proceed north up towards Commerce Street.
Can you point out the transfer station to me again, please?
That's highlighted in yellow.
Oh, that's right there. Okay. Yeah. I mean, just by looking at, I see, obviously you've got the train tracks abutting the property and there's a lot going there. And in your travels, Steve, have you heard of anything in regards to King Industries and downsizing or changing, you know, moving or anything along those lines?
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to talk about a little bit later was I think it might, I'm happy to reach out to them again. So as part of the waterfront plan, we actually sat down with representatives from King, Divine, and ONG and talked to them about their properties and their futures and what they intended to do. King had indicated that their preference is to stay. This is their headquarters. I got the sense that, you know, they would prefer that we leave their zoning alone. I think there's ONG, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, that there was definitely more openness and consideration for doing something different on the property. Their structure of decision-making is a little bit different, where they have multiple people at the table. So it wasn't as simple as one or two people making the call for the property. Where Divine, I think their intention, the last time I had talked to them, and again, this was, probably 2 years now, that their intention was also their preference to stay as zoned. But again, that's zoned for that mixed use component, so that could very well not affect them at all, but I think their preference is to stay as well.
Chemical manufacturing makes me think remediation. Do we have any information on that?
No, it's in it, and they're chemical, it's not like, solvents and oils, it's a different, is my understanding of things. So I don't believe that it's the same type of issue. Anything we've checked on in terms of mapping and trying to get sources from deep about contaminated sites, I don't recall their name ever popping up. We could do some digging and some research on that.
I guess I bring it up because, I'm all about, okay, if we're going to change something, is anything ever going to happen with it? I mean, it's, but I also hear Tom's point. I mean, it's the waterfront. I mean, we have very little of it, let's maximize it instead of, a few owners having, and just King Industries really need waterfront property to continue to function. So I guess, there's definitely two ways to look at this. Anybody else have any? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll be real quick. I think, one of the goals, just thinking back to the industrial zone study and also that carried into the waterfront study, was trying to, determine what we needed for industrial land, because industrial land is, historically been under pressure and been changed to other things. And we've kind of, it's unfortunate it was located in the areas it was located originally. And now it's kind of, trapped in some areas and kind of shoehorned in spots. So it's a question of, how much of it do we really need going forward, and should we give up?
I can't see you all because of the presentation, but does anyone else have any questions? Please speak
Yeah,
up.
I have a question, John.
John, sorry,
Yeah.
I've been waiting for a
Barbara,
while.
I'm sorry.
Is
Yes,
that Darlene?
please. I can't.
No, go
couldn't
ahead. I
see you.
can't see you. That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, okay. I just a couple things. I think that one of the things that we talked about when we last had this in this meeting was really thinking more towards the future. And why wouldn't we zone this area mixed use heavy industrial? Because, and just speaking for myself, I know that these are important industries and important employers here in Norwalk. And like you said, Steve, in a perfect world, we'd have a park there, we'd have, maybe a bandstand or something like that, but that's not what we have. But I think we really need to be thinking towards the future. And the other thing that, and I know I brought this up in the last meeting, is on Commerce Street. Ideally we would be able to finish the Harbor Loop Trail. And I know that that's a separate issue in terms of, pedestrian traffic and safety on Commerce Street. And that's a different issue. But I just think it's really important that we're thinking in the future about this. And I just like to see it mixed use, heavy industrial.
Yeah, I mean, two things just to kind of touch on. We usually go, planning cycles, or, they could say they could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I would hope that, 5 years from now, every plan, the industrial zones plan would get a fresh look. The waterfront plan would get a fresh look to see if those goals and the vision of that are still appropriate. I mean, more than likely, a lot of it will still be appropriate and make sense. But the one thing I think in my mind makes sense in terms of having some options built in is, especially where I would say for, the King property leaving an industrial is, and I put this clause together, which I think basically says, recognize that their King is important industry, don't change their zoning. But if in the future something changes on the property, then the plan recognizes the desire to return the waterfront to something more pedestrian friendly and amenity friendly and those kind of things. So I think we can accomplish both goals. I know everybody doesn't maybe agree with that, but I think that potentially we could.
Before Darlene, you speak, Steve, you mind just leaving it on the prior slide with the options? Thanks. Darlene, the one with all the options, please.
Oh, that guy? Yeah.
Yes. Darlene, you had a question? Ms. Young? All right, maybe we lost her. She's muted. I do not know.
She's definitely muted.
Okay, we'll go back to Ms. Shanahan. Lisa, I see you have a question.
Yeah, so I don't really have a question. I just wanted to echo the comments of both Tom and Barbara with the idea that totally we need to embrace the businesses that employ Norwalkers right now and that have been kind of historic businesses for our city. But I too tend to want to see a downzoning just so that when there are changes, then after the grandfathering goes off, that we would have a more mixed use, light industrial type of use.
Thank you. Darlene, are you still there? Right. Well, guess she'll eventually pop in. I mean, guys, you know how this works. We were throwing a lot of information, a lot of lingo, a lot of, everything all at once in the kitchen sink. So looking at all these options and hearing what the committee has to say, I thought maybe we move this along to at least get Steve in the right page and see if we're all on the same page, because it sounds like at the next meeting, this will most likely be up for a vote. So looking at these options, do you have any questions about them and which one kind of fills the need of the majority of this committee?
John?
Oh, there you are, Darlene.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I couldn't get to my
No worries.
mute.
Go ahead.
I'm traveling, I'm driving, I'm sorry. So I just heard something that I hope applies to South Norwalk. And I heard about, there being some flexibility and ability to downsize or minimize the industrial businesses. And I think that same thought should be applied to South Norwalk, because again, what we have in South Norwalk is a very heavily industrialized industrial area that really, and I'm just going to be honest, this new plan hasn't impacted our community in the best way. And and I'm concerned about that. And so I'm just putting that out there. I think the same terms and the same idea and thinking should apply to all other industrial areas in the city. So if there's an opportunity to go back and look at what we're doing and make some adjustments, I think that is fair, because what I've heard through this process, particularly when we're talking about South Norwalk, is that how much we needed these industries, and we really don't. We don't need all of these little contractor yards. We don't. And that was the message that I heard. I could be wrong, but I think the same thing needs to apply. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Young. And going back to, I guess, to what I said, I'm sorry?
Can I just go in? I agree.
I think, let the record show, Ms. Revoluz agrees. Yeah, going back to what I said, guys, this is, we've watched the seasons change, I think twice now with this study. So just to keep this ball moving, looking at these options, would it be crazy to say that option G and I, which I really can't see much of a difference in besides open space, I guess that's the one difference I'm seeing at the towards Commerce Street. But it sounds like option G and I are what the majority of this committee is leaning towards. Would that be a correct assumption?
That's certainly where I am.
Okay, good. Tom, Lisa? You there, Lisa?
Yes, sorry. I tried to nod and put my
Yeah,
thumb.
I'm sorry, I can't see you all because I got
Oh,
this
yeah,
little-
no, I agree.
Okay, I actually need to make him bigger. Barbara?
Ideally, yes. Realistically, I'm open to, it's a little hard to tell. There's too many options here, but something a little more transitional.
How about, since I have to, you don't have to make a decision tonight. So if I come back and narrow it down and send that out ahead of time and put
I
some
think that
thoughts
would
to
be
it,
helpful.
that possible?
Okay, so what are we going to be getting back? A variation of either G and I that may include some mixed use, some heavy industrial.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll actually tie that to the existing zoning, so it's maybe lines up a little more clearly for you, so you know exactly what the light industrial is versus the heavy industrial. I can make that more clear.
Okay, yeah, like I said, it's going to come back next month. You know where everyone's head's at. It's going to fail, and it's just going to be a back and forth. And next thing you know, it's the net. It's going to be the fall. So okay, so I guess Steve, you got an idea what we're looking for.
Yep.
I don't know. Is there more you want to present this evening? Any other information in regards to the waterfront stuff?
Figure we could spend a little time on Water Street too, if that's okay.
Please.
You just to muck it up even more, might as well jump
Yes,
down to
please.
the even more complicated
Hey,
area.
John,
Yes,
Chair?
Darlene. Yes, I
so
see.
you asked all three, but I am not sure where I stand with any of that. I'm one of seven, but I was not asked. And so
Oh yeah,
I
you
didn't-
were on, and I got cut off. But yes, I was thinking about that. I did not mean that disrespectfully at all. So Darlene, what was your you don't know which?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I definitely, I mean, my concern is if you go light industrial, then where does that leave King Industry? And then, so are we then looking for other areas in the city for them to relocate? And we all know where that would possibly be, and we don't need any more of that. So I don't know. That's where I stand with that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. All right. Steve, you want to?
Sure. So the last time we talked about when we spoke about Water Street, I had showed you a slide, I think might have been this slide or similar to this. And there was a lot of conversation about the north part of Water Street. I don't know if we got to find the southern boundary of what we thought was appropriate, but the idea was to allow for more of a pedestrian access, amenity style, pedestrian friendly area to the north. So it transitions into Washington Street, so there's more access to the water and those kind of things, or potential for boardwalks and so forth. The draft zoning that we had come up with, which reflects some of the recommendations in the plan, was, and what this yellow kind of rectangle represents, is a 250-foot distance from Water Street towards the water itself. So within that boundary, that's where the mixed-use development can be. So from running from north to south, there's a big difference in the depth of the parcels. So the first 4 or 5 parcels closest to Washington Street, those are, some of those aren't even quite 250 feet, where as you get further south, it becomes, half to maybe a third of the lot. And so part of the rationale for that would be that the street side development facing Water Street would be more pedestrian friendly and more attractive. And then the rear half could be, or the rear portion could be left for water dependent uses. And I'll show you what the definition of water dependent use is running forward. There were some concerns with some of these options. And so we went back and kind of started to kick around some other potential ideas. But I'll jump into that in just a sec. I just wanted to show you, this is the state statutory definition of what a water dependent use is. So it kind of runs the gambit, and it can be kind of what you see on the southern pictures where you have like a heavy marina, heavy boat presence, or it could be something such as a recreational boating facility, and even something that allows for public access. So it does run the gambit, and I think what's appropriate from site to site really is dependent on the particular constraints of that property in terms of where it's located to the the navigable portion of the channel, as well as proximity to other uses. So we did look at some other options, and still haven't kind of flushed this out already, but one idea we talked about was, well, okay, maybe we can do some kind of overlay zone on this kind of northern third of the Water Street area, leaving it the marine commercial zone, but then doing something where we allow the more just mixed use friendly uses on this northern portion and have the southern portion remain the truly water dependent use that's kind of consistent with what it is today. I think there could be some, I'm really, my biggest worry about anything isolating it to this is parking and how parking is going to work. So we're trying to work through some of those parameters now. The properties are going to be challenged, obviously, because they're within the flood zone. So that's going to dictate the type of construction that happens on the property and how those properties are accessed and utilized. But, so that limits what you can do on the ground floor. And I think particularly these northern pieces by themselves, they're not very deep. So to try to get parking included with those buildings might be tough. It's possible to, elevate the buildings to an extent to have the parking underneath, but sometimes that's not always the best practice either. A few other things to kind of keep in mind is if you put more density at the northern end, that and take it away from the southern end, that's going to cause you to have to potentially go more vertical on those parcels. And I know, the desire for, a portion of that for the waterfront is not to have the same scope and scale of development that's occurring inland. So that's something else to consider. I don't know if there's too much else unless you have questions on any of those pieces. So this is, again, something we haven't quite fleshed out all the parameters. I'm going to keep working on this over the next couple of weeks and should have a little more better sense of what's, feasible and not feasible.
Darlene, do you still have a question or your hand was up from before? Darlene? She must be still driving. Okay. Seeing no questions. All right, Steve, thank you.
Okay.
To be continued. And if you guys want to, give Steve a call, talk to him about your concerns, and hopefully at the next meeting we can take some action and get this, done. All right, moving on to the update on the zone Norwalk zoning regulations update.
So what I figured I would do, since I did meet with a lot of you and happy to meet with more of you, if you have questions, is kind of just talk about what we've done for outreach so far for meetings and where we're going in terms of the timeline and the final, resting spot for the adoption. And then just kind of go over some of the things we're hearing, just more common things overall. So we started out with, and I probably should have updated the slide because we've added some more meetings. We have done meetings with District D folks last week. We were in South Norwalk Monday, as well as in West Norwalk. And Tuesday night, I'm sorry, was kind of East Norwalk District C when we did that in the community room at City Hall. So we've conducted those to dates. We have probably 3 or 4 meetings set up next week, as well as 3 or 4 the following week, and then a few kind of sporadic ones here and there. We're getting requests from some smaller neighborhood little areas now that would like to talk. So we're working on those, as well as working through some of the other land use agencies and whoever would like to talk with us. And as well, I definitely extend that invitation to this group as well as the full council. If they ever have questions or want an update or a briefing, I'm happy to come and chat about that. Again, this is just more little specifics on the meeting dates in case anybody wants to plug in. We do have the schedule up on our website. We have to probably update it since we've added a few meetings since then. Next week is Bike Walk and 6 Taxing District, as well. I think the 15th is the following week. So we have a couple more meetings then and a couple more meetings towards the end of May.
And just to go back to that slide, Steve, some people might be interested that the one that's on that says Brookside Harbor View, that's a Zoom meeting for people who can't make an in-person, which might be a good thing to publicize.
Sure, we can do that. Yeah, that's definitely a Zoom one. And I think that's through, I think they're setting up the Zoom. If I'm not positive, but I'll double check on
No,
that.
no, Brian set it up. Brian
Oh,
Baker.
Brian did. Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, I know the ENNA meeting and the West Norwalk meeting were their meetings that we kind of piggybacked on. The other ones, we couldn't do the Zoom, the hybrid at the District D meeting, but we did hybrid for the meeting at the library on Monday, and also we did it for the the District C meeting Tuesday, and I think the District A meeting is also going to be hybrid. That one is at the library, the main branch library. The other meetings, the city agency meetings, will also be Zoom. I think just solely Zoom. Some other meetings we're thinking about doing, I think we're going to bring in, we get a lot of queries and questions from attorneys, so I think we're going to set up a couple of hour roundtable with all the land use attorneys and invite, some of the other folks that do a lot of work with the regulations, whether they're attorneys, architects, engineers. We'll probably set up a group of them. Also thinking about some business owners too, if we put maybe a roundtable discussion on that to, tell them what we're doing and, take any questions they may have. The Planning and Zoning Commission is looking at 2 public hearings to get feedback and do Q&A with the public on June 21st and June 28th, with probably an additional adoption hearing at the end of September. So I think what will happen is between now and the 21st and 28th, we're out talking to folks, getting feedback from those meetings, getting feedback, email, as well as some online portals that we set up. And then on the 21st and 28th, we'll get more hearings and more feedback. And then between July and August, the commission will kind of start to, we'll have all that collated for them. And they'll start to look at it and say, all right, these suggestions make sense. These don't. Make these changes. And then we'll put the recommendations out there for public consumption, and then have the final adoption hearing at the end of September. And I think what makes sense is probably have the effective date, January 1 of 24. So that gives people a few months to kind of figure out whether what they were doing or thinking about makes sense to go forward with now, or wait until the new regulations are in place. So I think it gives us time to also kind of get a little more used to things and then put practices in place. Couple other things we're thinking about in terms of outreach. We explored the idea of using like the robocall method, and that kind of didn't go anywhere basically because it's not the intent of that service. So what we're looking at now is talking with the tax collector's office. They do the tax bill mailings in about a month. So we're either hoping we're trying to be as nice and as nicely as possible, whether we can piggyback on those mailings or we do our own mailings with some kind of postcard explaining a little bit about the process, when the upcoming hearings are to the dates that we know, and then point them in the direction of where they can find the information and ask questions. So we're working on that now and hopefully have that finalized in the next couple of weeks. And so what have we heard so far? And you've probably heard some of this as well. We've had a lot of discussion. It happened Monday night as well as it happened on Tuesday night about combining the 1 family and 2 family zones. And that's not across the board. That's just the smaller lot B zone properties now with the existing C zone, which is a 1 and 2 family. So a few areas in particular have expressed opposition to that. Shorefront Park was one, an area of Devil's Garden, as well as we've heard some concerns in East Norwalk. So we've been having those conversations. There probably are going to be a few areas where we pull that back, where, but we followed some general principles with that, basically around our, mass transit, around our significant infrastructure and our job centers. We try to have the most dense development and then fan it out, becoming a little less dense.
Lisa, you have a question? I'm sorry.
Well, just to that point, I think you should just right now add Rowayton to that, because I don't need to tell you, Steve, because I've been on the phone with you and Tammy when she said she absolutely doesn't want anything around the Rowayton train station. And I think it will be very contentious. So
understood. I think for us, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't make a recommendation to consider it. Now, whether it gets ultimately approved or not, it's another story, but I think, from our perspective, it just something to at least talk about. And for us, it's just talking. Hopefully everybody's not angry, but it is what it is. It'll all work itself out.
Bring your
Um,
flak jacket for that one, I'd say.
We have a big vet, we have a closet full, so we'll be all right.
And Steve, just you brought up, and it raised a red flag with me when I first heard it, and that's, specifically to East Norwalk, where some single-family homes will now be zoned for two-family homes. I mean, I've never been a advocate or supporter of multifamily homes. I feel like, the likelihood of having an absentee landlord and properties falling into disrepair is likely. And then we're obviously, you got to think about the kids that we're going to add to the school system and so forth. But do we have an idea? I know I asked you this months back, but I can't remember the specifics of like how many homes are we talking about? It's just to kind of put it in perspective of like East Norwalk.
Yeah, I don't have that number in front of me. I can definitely get that. I have everything in little places, so let me put that all together, and I'm happy to send that out. I can tell you we've been looking at that a lot, and we actually looked at a couple different things today, and we're using information based on the tax assessor and tax collectors information. So, for example, citywide, with where the two-family zone exists now, about half the units, about half the properties are one family or two families, so they're not all twos. And of those two families, about half are owner occupied dwellings. So they own it, and then maybe they family members in the other unit, or they have a tenant in the other side. So it's not, our thinking is that if that trend continues, it's not going to lead to this proliferation of rentals all over the place. I think another important point that we've been saying is, so in that zone now, where you can have that B zone, which is that single family that's proposed to go to the two, you already can do ADUs. You can do the attached or the detached. So it's actually, from our perspective, not an increase in density. A couple pluses for why the two families are, in our opinion, are important is it potentially can lead to additional home ownership opportunities. Any new two-family that's developed has to have compliant parking, which would mean it has to have 4 spaces either to the side or to the rear. So that alleviates some of the concern with what's going on with the parking. We can't actually control where people park, especially if they have a large family and they have a lot of cars. That's out of our control, but we can say you have to have the required parking in certain spaces. So I think it alleviates at least some of that concern.
Right. So I mean, so can you please try to get me accurate information, or I guess more detail, like say, hey, John, it's going to be, or hey, committee, it's going to be, 50 homes are going from one family to two family, or I mean, you tell me, is that possible? Or
Yeah,
am I just going to get okay, not just with like red dots everywhere. Okay.
Yeah, we'll break it down. We just don't have it in like an organized format yet, but we've been looking at that because we anticipated these questions coming up.
Right.
I think the one important other point about that transition from just allowing one family to potentially allowing two families, it's not required to do two families. So you could still do one family if you chose to. So I think that the market will drive what's the most appropriate development for that particular parcel. And unlike the rezonings we did, say, up at Merritt 7, where we rezoned the entire west side of Glover Avenue to accommodate the master plan for BLT, these changes are going to happen incrementally over time. It's not going to be a wholesale transition. You might get one house that changes, and then 4 years later, another one changes. With the requirement in the form-based code, the good thing is it won't look like a box with a couple of doors. So I think there's requirements and design that aren't in the regulations now. So I think that's another plus to think about when we're talking about this change.
Yeah, something I think we definitely need to tread lightly with, because now even on top of what I talked about absentee landlords and so forth. I mean, you have the possibility of more illegal apartments, because you kind of get away with on a single family home or a multifamily home having an illegal apartment. It kind of neighbors that really don't know what's going on. But once you go to it's tougher to do in a single family home, let's say, to have an illegal apartment versus a multifamily home. But anyway, please, Diana, I see you have a question.
Question, comment. So just doubling back, and I get, but don't get what you mean by it's not an increase in amount. I'm just, the verbiage it just left me, but the amount of people that would be, because even if you can do an offset on the property, offset additional building, whether than a two-family, either way, that's going to cause an increase of bodies. So either way, if you're not used to it, it's going to cause more people to be there. That being said, this now is more the comment than everything, where everyone's kind of getting a little about being concerned about this. This is South Norwalk, right? Like, this is what we have to deal with on a normal basis. So the ideas of not only how this would work too, I would kind of want to comment and just say out. I personally would want a situation where if I was developing or purchasing, I would want to have my first home to be a multifamily home. Why? Because actually for financial stability in a family, whatever, that actually makes more sense than buying a one family home first. That being said, are we controlling or even talking or understanding the who can do this? And just making sure that I think the overwhelming concern is that it's not just a person who's truly going to be there, purchase the home, be the one of the families who are living in this double family, so on, but it's not just industry coming in and purchasing it and possibly having additional slumlords or whatever, because that's what. And the South Norwalk, like Darlene said, we actually need the complete opposite. So if that's an availability, which was being said, we need the complete opposite. But the possibility of affordable ownership, which I talk about all the time, and why I'm not 100% against what's going on, because it allows ownership in a different way to break it down in costs. I'm for it. But is there ever any verbiage on the who can do this to control who the landlord is and make sure it's not just someone coming in to buy a home cash and make a multifamily and not really be in there, you know what I mean? Like, is there any verbiage of the who can do this? Like, families can purchase this and make it a multifamily home. You know what I mean? Like, is there anything in that onset, anything that verbalizes that in any way?
I don't think there's any legal way we could do that. Definitely not through zoning.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying. I just don't think we have any legal basis to do something.
To do so. Okay. All right. That I'll look into it, but thank you.
Yeah. Oh, no, go ahead.
Steve, can you clarify something? We're talking about two-family homes, not multifamily homes generally.
Right. So our definition, and I understand people think about it a little differently. Our definition, we have single family, two family, and multi is 3 or more.
Thank you. I'm reserving comment at this time. I grew up first in a 3-family home, then a 2-family home, and then finally a single family home. So I'm reserving comment at this time.
The only other quick point I'd like to make is when we did look at this as well, and we looked at the, trying to figure out cost. It is much cheaper if somebody was just buying, and again, we can't control if somebody was going to buy the 2-family and then rent out both. But if someone was going to buy it as a condominium and own half, and then they have somebody else owns the other half, it's much cheaper to buy half of that than to purchase a single family house on that same lot. It would be
Exactly.
I think for us, it's an option. We can't say for certain what will happen, but we think this, and we'll provide you with the statistics of what's happening citywide now in the 2-family zone to give you, I think that's the only thing we can extrapolate from.
So can I just jump in, right? Just for what you said right there, this is why I'm not 100% against, because then in that, what you just said gives the availability for different families to be able to come into the area and purchase a home, if that makes sense, right? So that's where I'm for it. I just want to make sure it's families that get to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the piece I don't think we can control.
I get it, right. I understand. I'll look into that in a different manner, but please understand why I'm asking that question.
No, I
Thank
get
you,
the
Barbara,
point.
for jumping on.
The other thing we heard pretty loud and clear Monday night was, right now, and I think I talked about this with some of you before, we've proposed to combine kind of the from Wall Street, just north of Wall Street, down through where South Norwalk was rezoned a few years ago, and kind of give that the same zone. In doing so, we tried to match up the heights between the two, because the West Ave corridor allows for taller buildings than South Norwalk, so we proposed to bump the height up, but we heard that didn't go over very well. So I think we'll make a recommendation to the commission to pull that back to the 6-story, so it's not any taller than what's there currently.
Excuse me, Steve, can I just, I'm sorry, can I jump in, Mr. Kites?
Yes, of course.
So to that, so if you make that recommendation, will the Planning and Zoning Committee more than likely, or do they tend to vote or agree with what you put forward?
Yeah, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I think I'm pretty, because I think when we recommend something, there's usually a pretty good rationale behind why we recommend it. And I think if for something like that, it's a different argument than going from the 1-family to the 2-family, because I think the POCD itself recommends providing housing options, and it recommends looking at what's termed missing middle housing choice. So I think I think there's a more logical argument in that, and that's not to say that applies to every area we've proposed to make it a 2-family, but I think just in general that it makes more sense.
I mean, and the reality is you have folks who are business owners, who are realtors, they're in the field. And so they come with a different perspective. And sometimes they go with the alternative rather than what folks might be wanting. So I was just asking, but I'm glad I'm confident that you will make a great case. So just thought.
Yeah, I think that the key other key aspect of that is we haven't proposed any change to the density. So for, you think about the projects that are under construction right now, there really is no advantage to somebody going 2 extra floors, because then they're going to put in just massively sized units. And I don't know if that's really a moneymaker for them anyway. If we drop the density down, then they would definitely do it.
And just one more question. And so that would apply if we keep it at 6 stories to development that might take place farther down on South Main. So that would
Yes.
cover the area.
Yeah, and we did, and I could probably do it after if you'd like me to show you, or I could show it offline. We did pull a couple neighborhoods, couple blocks out of the I'll call the TOD zone. So it drops it down to like a 3.5-story versus 6-story. And the reason were there were a couple really intact neighborhoods that, the building typology was very similar, and it wasn't like you had a new development next to an older Victorian style house or something like that. So we kept that, pulled those out to try to preserve those neighborhoods and make it a little less likely they'll flip.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. The one other thing we heard, and this doesn't apply so much in the urban areas as it does in the more traditional single-family areas. There's just a little concern, which I think it's just more of unfamiliarity than anything else, about the lot width question. So right now, we regulate pieces of property by how wide they are on the street and how much land they have. But if you think about it, if you're driving by or walking by, you don't perceive area, you perceive width. You think about how this person's property relates to the property next to it in terms of how wide the building is, where the fence is, where the landscaping is. You really don't know anything about the area of the property unless you're looking at it from the treetops. So our recommendation is, and it's really like an urban form exercise, is to just regulate the lot width. We're also going to have a lot circle requirement in there. So in the AAA zone, for example, there really is no impact on any of this change because the lot width doesn't change from the old code to the new code. The only place where you might see a lot or two develop within the overall scheme is if somebody's on a corner. So they have two streets, so they have a lot more width than their neighbor might have. So there may be an additional lot there. But if somebody doesn't have that required lot width, they can no longer do a rear lot. So at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a very small amount of new development you'll see, if any, as a result of that. And I just think over time, it's going to lead to more unified development and make it a little simpler for everybody.
So Chairman, I have my hand raised up on that point. So, and Steve knows where I'm going because we had the West Norwalk Association meeting on Monday. And I would say that this was not, people weren't convinced. So I think we need to circle back on that. And I think I'm not convinced either. I think that there's, what's great about Norwalk is that there's all manner of different ways you can live here. And of course, that density and having, that's on a really important watershed. So not overdeveloping an area that's on a really important watershed is important to me. So can we separately, you sit down with Tom and me and just have you help us understand that this really isn't an issue? There's some people who are concerned because they moved to an area where they thought they were going to have 1 acre zoning. And then there's people like me who's really worried about the impact on the watershed.
Yeah, and Brian and I have been talking about, if you give us like a week or two, if that's okay, if we'll do some mapping and just kind of show you, because I've already looked at looked at like some of the larger parcels and what does this mean? And for the most part, if you're kind of, centrally located between two streets, it's not going to have any change at all. But like I said, if you're on the corner and then you've got technically like 400 feet of width, somebody might be able to carve that into 2 lots. But
Yeah.
they've still got to meet all the setbacks. They've got to, comply with the impervious surface coverage, have to provide septic and have those lot circles. So it's gonna, we'll map something out to give you a sense of what it looks like.
Yeah, I think that's really important because I think that neighborhood is not convinced about going with what you've come up with.
Understood. Yeah, it's something new, so we understand it's going to take a little bit of time. That's it.
I do not see any little hands up. Nope. Okay, Steve, I guess, obviously we're gonna have to stay on top of this, and I know it's for informational use only for us, but I think updating us on a regular basis would be helpful in seeing that we're the representatives of these individual districts and the city. Do you think perhaps July, get more under our belt and move a little forward and then come back to us with another update?
Yeah, so if we could do the waterfront stuff in June, if that's a possibility, and if there's something you want to talk about related to the zoning in June, we could do that. July's fine as well. Because the planning and zoning moved their meetings off your Thursday night, so I'd love nothing more to spend another evening with you guys in the middle of summer.
You advocating for a raise right now, Steve?
No, he's advocating for something else. With that crack.
Oh, Darlene, you have your hand up?
I just wanted to say thank you to Chairman Keides and to you, Steve. I think this was very helpful. And I think the city is going through a lot. We've got a lot of irons in the fire, and it's very hard to keep on top of everything and all the other things that happen in other committees. So this was very helpful, and I hope we continue to do this moving forward, because all we're doing for the next 10 years is going to be developing. So it's a lot going on. So appreciate it.
I've said this a few times too. I said what the industrial zones, the waterfront, and this rezoning are probably as messy as it's going to get.
Yes.
Because we're changing a lot and trying to undo a lot of, in my opinion, just things that got neglected over time. So hopefully once we get through this, we'll move on to like fun projects and things people like or hate less. Maybe that's the bar.
There's fun in planning and zoning. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions before we let Steve go? Okay, thanks, Steve.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. B1, advance that final FPY 49 annual action plan to the Common Council for its approval and to authorize the mayor to executive any and all documents associated with the submission of the PY 49 AAP to HUD and all documents consistent with the approval of the PY 49 AA P. Someone like to move this item? Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. Okay. I believe we had Mr. Bedoli on, correct?
Yep. Good evening, everyone. How you doing? So yeah, it's a pretty simple, straightforward item tonight. Basically, we have the formal document that we've been working over the past few months to put together to approve the HUD annual action plan. This is reflective of all the discussions we've had over the past 3 meetings. It's just the formal document for your consideration and approval.
And great, just to follow up on that, we, we did it the usual democratic way. Mr. Bedoli, I believe everyone got their top choice.
Yeah, correct. But there's only need for a minor reduction, like 7%, or something very small.
Okay. And also, just a reminder, I was going to remind everyone at caucus as well next Monday. What is it called? You got sent an email, right? The
conflict form?
conflict form. There you go. Thank you. The conflict form got emailed to you in both PDF, also a DocuSign. I found the DocuSign to be very quick and easy. I did it in literally under 30 seconds. Thank you, Stephen, for that, wherever you may be. So you have those. Please get them back if you haven't already to Stephen. Any questions before we call for a vote?
I just
Tom?
one quick question. Yes, Brian. I don't know if I missed it, but in prior reports, we've had sort of where we stand in terms of percentage of our goals.
That's the caper that comes around at a different time. We just did that a few months ago.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know if that was updated here. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. This sets the framework for that.
Right. Okay.
And thanks, Stephen, too, because I know you put a lot of work into this, and it's no easy task to get all those applications together. And so pass that message along, please.
Oh, he's here. I think he could
Oh,
hear
is
you.
he? Oh, there he is.
I'm here listening. Thank you.
All right, great. Gold star.
So Stephen, did you get my conflict of interest form? Did I do
I
it?
didn't. Thank you for returning it quickly.
I'm always the last one, and I was determined not to be this time. So thank you.
John, I think only John beat you, so you're number
Okay.
2 this time.
That's right. And it's even if by Monday you haven't gotten, you just maybe send a reminder, that would be great for those that
Yep, I
didn't
can do
send.
that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Ms. Shanahan, for moving this, and I will now call for the vote. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
And then moving on to business development and tourism, and item C1 is approve the Arts Cultural District delineated boundaries for inclusion in the Arts and Cultural District package to the Common Council for its review and approval. Would someone like to move this item? Thank you, Mr. Livingston. And Sabrina, will you be speaking to this, or Jess?
Yes, I'll be speaking to it, and then Jess can jump in if she needs to. And I'm sure Lisa and Tom will jump into. We've done a lot of work up to this point, mainly with the help of Lisa and Tom through the ordinance committee to get the Arts Commission ordinance edited to be at a place where we're about to be at public hearing, which is really exciting. So essentially, you guys have seen a presentation a few months ago about this topic, where we were going down the path of getting an arts and cultural district established in the city of Norwalk. We've done the due diligence to make sure we're delineating a boundary that isn't only consistent with some other incentivized boundaries that we have in the city, but also that encapsulates all of our urban core and also a lot of our cultural assets that we have in the city of Norwalk, which is a big component of why these boundaries were chosen, and why these are the ones that we're moving forward. So up to this point, we have, like I said, we've edited the ordinance. It is up for public hearing at the ordinance committee meeting this month. We've communicated to this committee and the ordinance committee kind of the path to get here. We've been in communication with the state as well, so they know kind of our package is up and coming should we decide to move forward. And really the purpose of this approval is to make sure that this committee sees the boundary, considering this committee is more fitting than the ordinance committee to authorize a boundary to be drawn in the city. So that's why we're bringing that this to you tonight, and then when it goes to full council, we'll have a complete package that includes the ordinance that's been through public hearing from the ordinance committee, and then also this boundary along with it. And these two items, after they are approved by council, would then go to the state for ratification, and that's kind of how we would move forward. So what I'm showing you right now, it says the enterprise zone boundary, but essentially it's the same exact thing. It's what we put in the package for you in that memo. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
So Sabrina, just on the approval, so your idea that this would not be approved by the council until the ordinances, right?
Correct.
Okay, so it just seemed getting ahead of ourselves, but okay. So we would do
Yeah,
it.
so we just wanted to take it through in case there was any changes between kind of what you guys wanted on the boundary side of the house through this committee before we put it forward as a package when the ordinance itself is actually done as well.
Gotcha, okay.
Yep.
Darlene, Ms. Young?
Thank you. Hi, Sabrina. I didn't see recreation and parks in there, particularly because we just did a process for accepting gifts for the city. And so I didn't see, it almost feels like it's a double step, or the recreation and parks is not part of this, particularly when I think those, if there's statues or whatever we do, it's going to be on city property, right?
Can I answer that? As we've been drafting the ordinance, we did have a long discussion about this, Darlene, because I was aware of what happened at Rec and Parks. So what we're basically doing is we're creating guidelines, because you can imagine that a statue is given, right? It might go to City Hall, it could go to the Board of Ed, it could go to Rec and Parks, it could go to any number of types of city property. And so the guidelines are going to direct how it should go. So the first thing is the Arts Commission would say, yes, we think that this is something the city should take and make a recommendation as to where it goes. But the guidelines will say, oh, you got to go to Rec and Parks and go through their process, or you got to go to the city and talk to Alan Lowe about their process. So Rec and Parks isn't being ignored. It's just that we're having a roadmap about how all artworks would be addressed. And that when we say pieces of art, it could be a statue, it could be a painting, it could be a mural that's painted on a staircase, all types of things like that.
What would be the harm in putting recreation and parks in? Because the council would, or another committee, or whatever that assigned committee.
It just bogged down the process. We thought that the guidelines were the best place to do that, because what if people decide that the process should change a little bit? Then you have to go through the process of rewriting an ordinance, which is cumbersome. But the guidelines are such that if Rec and Parks goes, hey, we just kind of want to change our process for accepting a little bit this way, it would be in the hands of Rec and Parks to make that decision, rather than having to go through a cumbersome ordinance process.
Just to highlight that, this ordinance does envision using the policy that you guys worked up in the committee on acceptance of donations and that stuff. So that doesn't go away. That this, as Lisa said, the ordinance kicks it over to that. So it is, so in essence, it does incorporate all the work that's been done there.
And also for other places, Board of Ed, the city, etc.
Okay.
I think.
So, but go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it actually gives more flexibility to Rec and Parks, because if you decide that you want to change what you're doing, you change what you're doing. You just have your new policy. You don't have to go through what's in stone, quote unquote, in an ordinance.
And has the name of the committee been changed? Was it?
Yes, right?
So, right?
Yes. So it's right now it's the Arts Commission. It would be changed into the Arts and Cultural Commission.
So we have recreation and parks and cultural affairs. Okay, so maybe we're not overlapping, but maybe we are.
Well, the cultural piece of this, so the Arts Commission, as you already know and are aware, they currently oversee the public art collection, all artworks in the city of Norwalk, any donations that we may get, all that fun stuff. So the only change here is that the cultural district, number one, gets established, but number two, that cultural piece is really only focused on this geography, which allows the commission to be able to solicit funds, get grants, all of that fun stuff, specifically only for this district. And I envision a lot of stuff that comes out of that commission for approval to come to Parks and Rec as well for the council approval, because anything we're going to be able to, anything that's going to require kind of a signed contract or a larger sum of money is going to have to go to council regardless. So I presume that's kind of where this commission would end up feeding to most of the time anyways. And Jess, go ahead. I know you have your hand raised.
Nothing
Yes,
like the
yes.
mute button. Yep, sorry, nothing like the mute button. I was just going to reiterate what you were saying, Sabrina, that Darlene, when it's related to cultural, we can bring it through Parks and Rec, and we can even bring it to you, the items that get passed through there for you to know about, to see if we should be taking it through Parks and Rec. So anything that would end up on city land will go through Parks and Rec. And in addition to that, anything that's culture, that's related to a cultural spend, we can bring that to you as well, if you'd like. But we can work offline with you to figure out what the right balance is with that and what you're most comfortable with. And I think it'll be sort of each item that we look at or each piece that we want to pass, but we can work with you really closely to figure out what you're comfortable with, and we can take the council's lead on that.
Thank you, Jess. So really, I just think from the perspective of whoever is there, I think if we're doing this, it's just about how do we stay, how do we build on some continuity, right? And that's what we've all been trying to do, is change the process that we go through a lot. We find that we're not communicating as well as we should have been. And I'm not saying right now, I think because we're trying to improve that, but if that's, whatever the process, whatever the easiest thing ends up being, I just want to know. And I'm not sure how much of Robert's input or communication was had with him about any of this. So just, we can work it out. It'll be all fine.
Anybody else? Okay, great job. Thank you, Mr. Livingston, for moving it. Now I will expand this box to make sure I catch everybody. There it is. All in favor, please raise your hand and signify yes. Unanimous. Great. All right, seeing no other business, I will now call for a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Make a motion. All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a
Good
good night.
night, thanks.